You know, the last several sessions, we have gone from session to session with some pretty big gaps in time. You know, we went from the 3rd year to the 7th and 8th year to the 12th year as we in between chapters of Esther. But here we see we are going straight. I mean, we're not skipping any time at all. We're going right on where we left off. And where we left off last week was with Mordecai understanding that he had made Haman so mad that Haman was not only going to take revenge against Mordecai for not bowing to him, but he was also going to take revenge against the whole Jewish nation. And so Mordecai was just mortified, I guess you'd say, at that realization. So when we pick up here, we see the Bible tells us that he is going through the city streets, and he is wearing sackcloth and covered in ashes, and he is wailing very big. And back in those days, it was common for everyone, not just the Jewish people, but it was common for almost everyone for them to wear this sackcloth. Back in that time, it would have probably been a coarse cloth made out of black goat's hair. And so it would have been rough and uncomfortable, and he would have put that on. They would, wear the ashes because that was just a symbol of the lowest, and some of them would say from dust we came. And so it was just a sign of terrible mourning. Well, with that black, an interesting note is we still, today, we wear black when we're in mourning, for most part. I mean, that's been a tradition all of my life growing up. You see someone wearing black, it was a sign that they were in mourning. It was a sign that it was a very serious or formal time, maybe. For me, a lot of times it was a sign because I wanted to look slimmer. So that was a little bit of mourning for me. But so black was a sign of mourning, and that is, I found that interesting. But it says that he went out into the city and he was wailing. And when we look at that word in the original text, it's not like he was just crying, like, oh, things are bad. No, he was wailing. I mean, this was a gut-wrenching wail that would have been heard. I mean, when somebody was walking by, they would have immediately not noticed that he was in mourning, but it was like, oh my goodness, this man is suffering terribly. So that is the kind of mourning that he was doing. And I imagine that maybe I would have felt the same way if I had known that something that I had done had not only affected me, but an entire nation. So that was where Mordecai was at the moment. It also tells us that the Jews in the city were also doing that they had gotten word of the proclamation that had come out with the king's approval, and so they were also wearing sackcloth, and some of them were in ashes, and they were weeping. It was really a terrible time of confusion. So if you can picture yourself, in the first session I asked you to close your eyes and go back to this city and see what it was like. If you could just picture that city again and see all these people in the street and hearing the confusion and the wailing that is going on. So, it was not a good time in the city. And there was, I imagine, some division, as we talked about, some division that appeared right away. There were those who were wailing, and there was those who weren't wailing. And there was the Jews and those who weren't Jews. So there was some division right there. It says that he went to as far as the king's gates, and he couldn't go in any further. He couldn't go into the palace and that surrounding area because he was mourning. I also find that interesting because what that tells us is the king was kept away from the people who were in suffering and despair. So, it just kind of gave the king that little comfort area around him where he didn't have to worry about that. So he was a little disconnected from the people. Esther's eunuchs and her female attendants, they noticed that Mordecai was in mourning. And they knew that Mordecai was important to Esther because they go and they tell Esther what is going on. Well, at that point, Esther is just pure woman, I think. Because I think she's grown up a little bit. I mean, she was young when she got married, but I think right now she's pure woman. If you notice what she did is she finds out somebody's in trouble and she tries to fix it. Exactly. She tries to clean them up. It reminded me of when my kids were little and they would fall and scratch their cut their knee or something like that. They maybe had on little shorts or whatever, and I would, clean it up the best that I could and dust off their shorts, or if they tore their pants, I would put on different pants or their tights. That was always a big thing. You dress them up and they put on the pretty white tights, and sure enough they fall and tear their tights and scratch. But clean them all up and say, okay, you're all right. And they would look at you like, it still hurts. It still hurts. But that's what we do. We want to fix it the best that we can, and that's what Esther did. She sent clothes out to Mordecai because Mordecai is in this disarray, and he is mourning, and she's not been connected to him like she used to be, and she's not really sure. So she goes out there and sends clothes. Well, he sends them back. And in that moment, she knows, well, that didn't fix it, whatever it was. So she sent one of the eunuchs back to Mordecai to ask what is going on. And Mordecai tells him, I refused to bow down to Haman, and because of my actions over and over and over again, because over and over and over again I refused to do that, I am going to be killed. And not only me, but the entire Jewish nation. So you've got to send a copy of this back to Esther so she sees and reads exactly what's going to go on, and tell her she's got to go to the king. She's going to have to go to the king and plead mercy for your people. So he goes back and he tells Esther. And Esther, I think at this moment, she kind of takes a pause. That first time when she hears that Mordecai is suffering, I think her response was pretty immediate. I think she just kind of went out there and sent it. But I think this time she takes a pause because, last week we said that probably the honeymoon was over because it had been 4 years. If there was ever a time that we could say, yeah, the honeymoon's over, it's right here. Because she says to him that all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. Honeymoon over, but 30 days have passed since I've been called in to see the king. So for whatever reason, Esther has not been called into the king. Now, is he busy with another campaign towards Greece? Is he calling a lot of them out of his harem, and she's just fallen down the line? Has he been kind of under the weather? We don't know, but all she knows is she's just not there by his side. So I think she takes pause because there's something that she's looking at. See, remember when she first was summoned to the palace, she knew that if she didn't go, as a young virgin, beautiful virgin, if she didn't go, she could face death. So now she's looking, and how ironic, if I go now, I could face death. So I think she's got that thought going on. And she is, in the palace. And in the palace, she's a little sheltered. So she takes a pause, I think. And then she sends that word back out to Mordecai. Well, Mordecai decides that's not enough. That's not good enough. And so he kind of sets her straight. And if there was ever a time in the Bible that I think is important, I think it's this time. I think that there's a reason why the scripture that we're fixing to fall on is a very popular scripture that we hear. I think this is a moment where Mordecai says, I need you to sit up and pay attention. You ever tell that to anybody? You know? Did you ever to anybody, if you had your kids or you taught school or anything, you were like, look at me, listen to what I'm saying. It's a be still moment. How many of you are recognize the scripture, be still and know that I'm God? Psalm 46:10, exactly. Well, that is where I think Esther is right now. As Mordecai is talking to her, he's saying, be still and know that he is God. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But what he says to her, he says, do not think, this is in verse 13, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your families, your father's family, will perish. And who knows? But that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. At this moment, I think Esther takes a long pause. Because he has just laid it out there pretty blunt for her. I think she can almost hear, even though he's not speaking directly, I think she can almost hear when he was raising her and he would have that sit down moment with her and say, listen. I think she can almost hear his voice as he's telling her, and she is taking a long pause here. Well, Esther, she sends a reply back to Mordecai, and it says, okay, go and gather all of the Jews in the city and have them fast. And then I will do the same with my attendants. But I want you to notice what she says at that moment. You have them go fast, and then I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. So she has taken pauses. She has had some excuses that we're going to discuss. But I want you to notice and keep that in the back of your mind. At that moment, she says, if I perish, I perish. So Esther, that's where we leave off in our scene. But, Esther was in the palace. And she was protected, just like we said. Mordecai couldn't come in the gates because the woes of the people could not be surrounded by the king. So because she was queen, she was also not subjected to that. So she was in the palace where she had lost connection with people who were suffering and in mourning. I imagine her attendants, if they came in to help her dress in the morning. Esther was a nice woman, so she may have said, how are you today? I don't think they said, well, I'm not feeling too good. Or, I've got a problem with my son. Or anything like that. I'm sure that anybody that helped the queen always put on a smile on their face and just didn't give her anything to worry about, even if it was of themselves. So when Esther heard Mordecai was mourning, this brought back her to a time outside of the palace. And I think she had to think back on her past some. And I think she had to begin to discern on what to do. And I believe that's what she did. She's just like us. You get up in the morning and you discern, well, okay, what kind of day am I going to have? What's on my schedule that I'm going to take care of today? What's on my schedule I can put off until tomorrow? Who do I have to deal with today? What do I need to fix today? Is there some issue? So we go through a lot of decision making and having to discern what to do. We see that, but that's what Esther is doing right here. The first thing she does is she says, when she finds out Mordecai is suffering, and she sends the clothes out, basically what she's saying is, I can't be there, Mordecai, I'm sending you some clothes. can't be there, so I'm going to give you my condolences. If there is anything I can do, just let me know. Has anybody ever said that in your life? Has anybody ever said that? Has said that in the last couple of weeks? Probably. In our community especially, there's someone that you've probably said, if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. Because we have a lot of people in our community that are hurting. I think that's what Esther was doing at that point. She was saying, if there's anything I can do, let me know. But it wasn't enough. So the answer came back, I need you to go to the king. Well, then it got a little bit more personal, didn't it? I mean, it was no longer out there. It was like right there with her. And now it was going to affect her, not just him, but the request was going to affect her. And it was going to take her out of a much, much more comfortable position than what she was really wanting to give up. Because what does she do? She gives him an excuse, right? She said, well, I'm not really in a position to help you. That's what she's really telling him. I mean, she is the queen, but she said, I'm really not in a position to help you. I'm sorry. Well, we have to give her a break, right? Because she is disconnected and she could very well lose her life. So I think it's okay for us to sometimes not want to lose our life, right? But in this particular instance, that wasn't going to cut it. There was more for it. And so when Mordecai gave her that be still and no speech out of 46:10, Psalm 46:10, that is a game changer for Esther. I'm going to summarize Psalm 46:10 for you. I think, I don't remember, there's like 12 verses or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize for that. But it kind of says, God is our refuge and strength. It's nice. An ever-present help in trouble. That's nice. Therefore we will not fear. That's nice. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging, God lifts his voice. The earth melts. Come and see what the Lord has done, because he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. I think this is a be still moment, but what does that really mean, this be still moment? Because I've said it a couple of times. How many of you, if you were honest, could say that you've taken that verse and kind of said, okay, the Bible says, be still and know that I am God, so I'm just going to not worry about it. I'm not going to do anything because he's God. He's got it all under control. Anybody ever said, well, I'm just going to let go and let God? Remember that saying? I'm going to let go and let God. That's not what this verse is saying. I mean, I have said that before. I'm just going to be still. I can't do anything about it. It's just in God's hands. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to sit down on the couch and I'm going to look at Netflix because I can't do anything about it. That's not what this verse is saying. See, this verse is saying, be still. And the word there, still, doesn't mean just stop. That's not really the meaning of the word still. The word still means to absorb. It's kind of like put yourself in a position to go, like that. A few weeks ago, our Sunday school class, we always go out and eat on Sundays. And so we went to one of the cafes, and it was really, really noisy in there. It's one of the noisiest ones. We have a hard time hearing. You lean forward and you're trying to hear what everybody is saying. And it's always full. I'm guessing there's 60 people in there or something. So it's busy. You can hear chairs when they're scratching, plates when they're being put down, people when they're talking and carrying on, and orders being called out. And you hear all of that. But you're really keyed into who's around you, and you're listening to them talk. And I think I really actually was kind of leaned in, trying to hear the person across from me when I heard, hey! just heard, if that hey hadn't come out, no one would have heard that because it would have been mixed in with everything else. But when that noise came out, you knew it was from a man's voice, and the whole place just got still, and everybody just went. And we could see the man, you know, so if everybody's still, we're absorbing it. It's, what is going on? And we looked at the man, and I couldn't tell that anything was wrong with the man, you know. He was talking to the waitress, couldn't tell that there was anything wrong with the waitress. Don't know what had been said or what had happened, but I could tell that it was okay, right? So we just all kind of started talking again. But in that moment, that was a be still moment to absorb it and see what was happening. Just a short time ago, everybody in this room knows that our community has suffered a tornado, right? And that tornado stayed on the ground. I'm going to try to get it straight. Stayed on the ground for 8.5 miles, I think, for 22 minutes. It was like 1,000 yards wide, and it just went through our community. And we sat on the edge of a national forest. We've got all these big pines that stand up, and I don't know how tall those things are. 100 feet, they say, at least. I mean, they're tall, right? And so they're all just standing like this. Well, you know, we found ourselves under the stairwell to stay safe when the tornado warning came out. But when we came outside the next day, we had a couple big limbs down, but not anything major had happened in our neighborhood. But we drove just a little ways down the main strip, and it was a be still moment. It was like, take it in. Because those big old trees were standing up like this, and they had just went, and then you drive a little bit further and they had went like this. And some a little bit further and they were twisted around one another. It was just amazing and awesome in a terrible way, an awesome show of strength in the wind. It was one of those moments when you just absorbed what was going on. So when we read Psalm 46:10, and it says, be still and know that I am God, what he's saying is, take notice. Absorb it. I am God, and I will be exalted. I think that's what Esther was thinking at that particular time. I think Mordecai had given her that moment. This is huge. This is about God and his people. And here I am. I think it's a moment that we've kind of been talking about through these sessions where it was a display of God's sovereignty at work. And I think she realized in that moment it was God's providence that we've talked about that put her where she was. She understood that just because she was in the palace, she wasn't safe. Just because she was in the palace, she couldn't rely on her comforts. What does he tell her? He says, don't think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. And I really had never noticed this until I really started studying the book of Esther. It says, I did this, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance from the Jews will arise from somewhere else. But I had never noticed this before. But you and your father's family will perish. I never really paid attention to that part. That kind of struck me. And it says, but who knows? Maybe you have been called to a royal position for such a time as this. So what is being said here? God is God. And God is sovereign. God is everywhere. We've talked about it before. He's everywhere. He does what he wants, when he wants, how he wants, right? And it doesn't matter what we want. It's God's plan. And God's plan is going to be called to fruition. It's going to take place. So we hear that in Mordecai's instruction to her, that this is God, never mentioned in the book, but this is God's plan. And just because you are safe, think you're safe in the palace, that doesn't mean you're not going to be touched. And that's what it says to us. See, God is sovereign. And by his providence, just like he put Esther there, he's put us here. And he has a plan. And by his providence, he has put us here. And whether or not we decide to go along with God's plan, doesn't matter. We will be touched. And I think there's a little bit of accountability here when it says, when he tells her, but your father's family will perish. I think that's really a time that it was an extra note for me to sit up and take notice. I will be touched. God has a plan, and he's going to make sure his plan finishes. And it doesn't matter what I think about it. It doesn't matter whether I decide to go along with it or not. I just need to know that my life will be affected. So am I going to follow God's plan? Or am I not? And that's where he gives me a free will. But God has a purpose for each of us. And right here, right today, we can have us a moment where we can say, wow, God will be exalted. Did you notice that Mordecai said, you can remain silent if you want, but that's not going to do any good for you? Did you notice in Psalm 46:10 where it says, come and see? Those are not places that we are just kind of sitting back doing nothing. So when we are being still, we are to absorb, but we are also to do. Come and see. That's an action. Don't be silent. That means we're to be speaking. So as we, in the context of what we are doing, as far as being in God's plan, what he has called us to do, there's a couple of takeaways there. That we are not to be silent. That we are to be on the move. So that remote that kind of calls you sometimes, we don't exactly want that. If I wanted to summarize what is happening to Esther and put it into the context of what we are doing, is as this is happening to Esther, she is actually discerning. And as she is discerning, she is deciding. And she's making decisions, and these decisions aren't complete. I mean, she's had to make 3 different decisions, but she is deciding, and she's building, and she's building. And what she's looking back on is that foundation is starting to come clearer and clearer, that God's foundation is there for her. And I can say with full faith that as she discerns and she decides that she does trust God. Why? Because she says, going fast, and if I perish, I will perish. So at that moment, she's decided she's going to do it. What Mordecai has asked her to do. Does she do it right that moment? No. Because she's got to surrender. As she does that fasting, what she is doing is she is taking time to surrender. Well, what is she surrendering? I mean, that's important for us to know. She is surrendering her strongholds. She is surrendering her strongholds. I want you to listen to this. 2 Corinthians 10. This is Paul, and he is talking, and Paul has been having to defend his ministry. Paul is not the typical apostle that the people want, but he is defending what he does. And he gives a testimony, just like I had y'all do. He's given a testimony of what he has learned as he has been doing his ministry. He says, the weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish strongholds, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience once your obedience is complete. Paul is saying that he had some strongholds. And we've talked a lot. I know that you've been in probably many a Bible class talking about Paul and his thorn in the flesh and how he had to get past that. And getting past that was a stronghold. That's what Esther's doing. She's getting past her strongholds. She's having to get past the comfort of where she is. This word stronghold in 2 Corinthians, if you look up the original word for that, the stronghold is the castle. See, Esther was safe in the palace. He says we need to demolish those palaces. We need to demolish those castles. And the way that we get rid of that type of stronghold, that castle, that palace is our stronghold. It's where we are. That's our lifestyle. That's where we're comfortable. We need to demolish that. And the weapons that God provides will demolish those. So that's our points tonight, is our weapons that God provides us with have divine power. And what will they do? They will demolish our arguments. You know, she said, Esther said, I'm just not in a good place to help you. See, that was a stronghold. That was an argument she had to get past. Well, Paul tells us that the weapons we fight with, what God provides us with, will demolish that sort of argument. Because that type of argument sets itself up against the knowledge of God. So if you have that kind of stronghold in your life where you kind of set up an argument, I can't do it right now because I'm just really busy doing everything else. I can't do it right now because my work is getting in the way. I can't do it right now because I'm taking care of my parents. I can't do it right now because I'm babysitting my grandkids. I can't take care of it right now because I've got vacations for the next 3 months. I'm just not in a good place. Those are our arguments that we set up. God provides us weapons to break through those arguments that are set up against God's will. And also, God's weapons take our thoughts captive. Takes our thoughts captive. When we are going to release our strongholds, then we need to know that our mind is a big stronghold. But that God's weapon is to take it captive. He says, I will renew your mind. And think of the things not of the world, but of the things of me. Right? And then the last one, that the weapons that God provides with this divine power, this is one we kind of don't like. It will hold us accountable. I saw you snarl your nose. That's a hard one. But it will hold us accountable. It says, and we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience once your obedience is complete. What it's saying is, once you have reached the point where you understand that you are to obey God, and you understand that this is what God is asking you to do, then it's at that point you become accountable for your action. You have been made aware. But God has the weapons that will break down those strongholds. So Esther had a lot of hesitations. We see Esther as strong. She was. We see her as just respectful. We see her, and we'll see her just be so brave as she goes forward. But she's just like us, in that she had a lot of hesitations that she had to get past. And what did she decide to do before she actually went forward? She was going to take some time. She was going to take 3 days. And during that 3 days, she was going to surrender. She already knew that she was going to trust God, because she's already told Mordecai. But she's going to take the time to get herself fully surrendered to whatever plan God has for her. So as we look at our plan, what God is asking of us in our life, as we are trying to figure out over the next several sessions what that might be in the short term for us, are we going to be willing to look at our strongholds? Are we going to be willing to surrender them? Each of us is an individual. It's an individual choice. God gives us that choice. But just remember that whether you're on board or not, God's plan is going to move forward, and you will be touched one way or the other. All right, that's all I have.